Chapter 11. A long legal tussle, a 10 years drama, 1984 to 1994. After squeezing ourselves in a single room, me, my children, and my two sisters for some years, whereas I could only be able to pay rent for a single room, I felt a strong urge to buy a house and a piece of land whereby I could be able to build a home. My employers, the bank, discriminated against giving women loans for properties. I decided to try and I applied for a loan to buy a plot in Ngong and build a house on it. Due to the gender bias which was there, my application was turned down. Reason: the proposed plot is not within the vicinity of the applicant place of work, which was the city center. I got broken-hearted but didn't give up. I was fascinated by areas surrounding the Ngong Hills and continued going around looking for a good area to buy a plot. And it was around that time I met an official of the AFC who offered some help and asked me to get a plot and then contact him, since there was a way in AFC whereby people acquired land in Rift Valley through professional undertaking, even if I didn't have a title deed. He told me the same land you buy is taken as collateral for the loan you are given. Since I didn't have any security, I felt I could be helped through that scheme. I made every effort to get some land. I saw a good plot of land and a neighbor told me that the owner lived down at Emali off Mombasa Road. Mr. Wakafa agreed to take me to Emali and I paid for transport, but when we arrived at Emali, we found the then MP for the area, Sepashina Olaitip Tip, was being entertained there. It was funny seeing women and children bending their heads to be touched on their heads by their leader. I learned that was their culture for greetings, but one girl child was too short and lingered under Olaitip Tip's pot belly, which was too big until one of his men notified him about the child. He eventually bended and touched her head. I noticed that goats belong to women and they are the ones who slaughter and serve the meat to their men. Mr. Wakafa put a spirited struggle to get the man we had gone to see to give us a chance, but the man seemed too ignorant. Mr. Sultan, whose family owned stretches of land from Emali all the way to Narok, was a proud old typical Maasai man. When he eventually agreed to talk to us, he looked very disgusted, especially when Mr. Wakafa told him that I want him to sell me a part of his land in Ngong. He angrily asked a small girl. He was spitting every time he looked at me. He asked me, "Where will you get money to buy land?" I told him I had money, but he angrily spat again and looked more disgusted. We tried all we could to convince him, but all in vain. We drove back to Nairobi, but years after, the whole land had been sold and nice homes built all around. Later, I saw an advertisement on a daily newspaper and contacted the agent who had advertised. But when he took me to the land they intended to sell, I discovered it was for another lady who I knew, and she was not selling it. I told them outright. The other person then said, "Don't worry, come tomorrow, we will show you another land." So the following day, I told one of my sisters who were living with me to accompany me to go and see the land. We were taken to Ongata Rongai and shown quite a big chunk of land. My sister insisted it was good. Although I didn't like it much, the strong urge of having a plot made me change my mind to buy it. We organized with the seller and concluded that he will sell it to me. But my being a greenhorn where matters of land were concerned, and having had not done any land transaction, I didn't know what I was required to do apart from doing the search. But when we got to the lawyer to draw an agreement, he said, I get a search certificate from a land office Kajiado, which we got and handed over to him. It showed that the land was 1.21 hectares, which is equivalent to 3 acres. The lawyer did not tell me that a map would also help me locate the land I was buying. The price agreed upon was 35,000 per acre, hence I was to pay to the owner 122,500. Due to some rules of the AFC, I couldn't get all the money at the same time, but could get a certain percentage. Therefore, I got 72,000, and that is what I gave to the seller. Little did I know I was entangled in a long legal tussle over the acreage of the land. When we sealed the deal, the seller's heart was on a puzzle. He was telling me he had sold to another family, but he was incoherently fussing about the deal with that family. When I went to that place the following week, I found the hut had been moved to the area I had already bought, and the young trees had been planted as a boundary at the area looked curiously small. I looked for a surveyor who measured the land and told me it was twice as smaller as the records in the land office were indicated. I looked for the seller and asked him where the land is, and he told me. Mr. and Mrs. Gitonga fraudulently annexed it to their land. I asked him who they were, and he said they are immediate neighbors who planted the tree's hedge. Immediately they discovered he had sold me the parcel whose half they had annexed to their parcel. He also said his family's hut was on Gitonga's parcel, but immediately I bought the other parcel, the family was kicked out of the Gitonga's parcel. During the same period, I had gotten a house in Buruburu Estate and had applied for house loan from the bank, and this time round Mr. Rampuri, my Asian boss who was the manager of Standard Chartered Bank, Gateway House branch, he recommended me for the loan and it had been approved. Me and my family of 3 children and my sisters had moved to Buruburu. The bank made a standing order immediately and started deducting the house loan from my salary. I made a standing order to AFC, but later found out that I couldn't be able to pay both loans at the same time. I was not worried because the land was there and I could sell part of it if the going got tough. I feared the foreclosures of the AFC if I would be unable to repay the loan, but got comforted by the fact that the land was there and I could sell at least a piece if I need be to repay the loan. My elder brother went with second surveyor who had a map and showed him the land I had bought. They measured it and were shocked to get only 1.40 acres instead of 3 acres showing in all documents. Part of the land I had been shown belonged to other people who had bought earlier than me. Mine turned out to be narrow stretch of land surrounding other parcels which had a seasonal river frontage whereby a whole 40 points was solid rock and few points looked like a road reserve, then a piece of land. When I heard that, I got a shock of my life. I took other surveyors, went with them, and we measured and then arrived at the same acreage, 1.4 acres. I got confused. Although now I had evidence, I didn't know what to do or where to start. I looked for the seller, but after telling him what I had found, he murmured and he said that his land was even more than 3.2 acres, but still insisted the missing part was annexed to the Gitongas, whose land was the same size as the one I bought according to the seller. But on the ground, Gitonga's land looks like it is more than 5 acres. I continued pushing him and he told me he had 8 acres, of which he sold 1 acre to one person and then sold 3.5 acres to Gitongas. Just a little while before he sold the last piece, which was supposed to be 3.5 acres to me, he said the Gitongas are the ones who annexed the missing part of the parcel. The person who had bought 1 acre was also on the solid rock down the slope, suffered the same fate. He was Mr. Evans Jenga and Karathe, the seller cousin. I met him one day and he told me he had bought the best part that Gitongas bought, but was paying in installments. But when the Gitongas came and gave Karathe a lot of money, and Karathe, being a drunkard, forgot that Evans Jenga was his cousin, when he went to the chief told him to choose either to lose his money or take the rocky part. He had no choice because when the seller saw Gitongas had a lot of money and were interested in buying, he got confused because of the money. Karathe now sold the part Evan Jenga was buying with installments to Gitongas, but since Karathe was addicted drunkard with a habit of daily drinking and even taking the strongest stuff like changa, he was very rough. Although Evans Jenga was related to him, he suffered like me because of Karathe's behavior. Ivan painfully told me that the land I had bought was taken by Robert. I then embarked on the long struggle. I started with the local land office, who offered me to the local divisional surveyor, who also referred me to district land registrar. When I went to see registrar, the district land registrar declined completely to help me and instead referred me to the district surveyor. The district surveyor also declined to help me and referred me back to the district land registrar. They kicked me like a ball until I got completely confused. I traveled to Ongata Rongai, Ngong and Kajiado until I got tired. I decided to hire a lawyer, my friend, the company secretary, AFC, then who had helped me acquire the loan. Mrs. Hayanga introduced her lawyer friend, Veronica Nyamondi, and co-advocates. Mr. Nyamondi tried to help me, but she failed. I decided to try another lawyer. I got introduced to Brian Omondi and co-advocates, who also tried, all in vain. He also neither made head or tail, but I paid both lawyers their fees, who did the paperwork without any success. It was a very tricky situation which beat everybody. In the course of those struggles, I came to conclude that they are some kind of legalized crimes when I faced government officials who shamelessly told me to use that title deed to acquire loans from commercial banks instead of them adjusting the boundaries, whereas it was one of their lot who had messed the boundary. They argued that there was in law picking of the boundaries, and that is what they had done in this case, whereby they were shown where to mark the boundaries without measuring. I asked them, in that case then, how did they arrive at the acreages they had shown on both parcels if it was picking of the boundaries that was done there? None of the officer gave me an answer to that question. The struggle continued many a time. I felt so discouraged, but at the back of my mind, I felt I cannot give up, and whenever I thought of giving up, I always met people who encouraged me, telling me never to give up, and I always saw light at the end of the tunnel. The struggle started way back in 1984, long before I met the Friends of Sinners. I went to the Surveyor of Kenya offices in Ruaraka. I was referred to one of the senior officers who checked and showed me the map. This was after lawyer Brian Omondi threatened to take court action about this issue. The officer told me according to the map, there is nothing wrong. I told him the area as recorded in the map is not so on the ground, but I never made any headway. I had thought that going to Ruaraka would have solved or eased my problems, but as usual, it made matters even harder.